151 years after Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote the poem Locksley Hall, this editorial appeared on the pages of the Wall Street Journal. It's written by Arthur Schlesinger. It's entitled Bye Bye Woodrow. And it's the idea that at that time there was opposition to going into NAFTA and the World Trade Organization. There were a lot of Americans who wanted to maintain our sovereignty as a nation. They didn't want to relinquish our sovereignty to this world government. And at the very end of this, why Schlesinger writes this: "The world of law will not be attained by exhortation. Law requires enforcement. Let's not kid ourselves that we can have a new world order without paying for it with blood as well as with money. Maybe the cost of enforcements are too great. National interest, narrowly construed, may well be a safer rule. But let us recognize that we are surrendering a noble dream. Remember those lines of Tennyson that Churchill called the most wonderful of modern prophecies and that Harry Truman carried in his wallet throughout his life? For I dipped into the future, far as any eye could see, saw a vision of the world and all the wonder that would be, heard the heavens filled with shouting and the rain to ghastly dew of the nation's airy navies grappling in the central blue, till the war drum throbbed no longer and the battle flags were furled in the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World." Now, if you read what Arthur Schlesinger Jr. has written, why, you'll notice he refers to Churchill. Churchill embraced this idea. Well, why did Churchill embrace this? Wasn't Churchill the great champion of the British Empire? And why did Harry Truman embrace this idea? Wasn't he dedicated to America? And then if you go back and you remember what happened during Harry Truman's administration, why Eastern Europe went communist. Now everybody wants to say, oh, well, that was FDR, the agreements he made with Stalin, but Harry Truman said it best when he said the buck stops here. The buck stops with the president. And it happened on his watch and he could have stopped it. But under his watch, we turned Eastern Europe over to the communists at the end of the Second World War. And then, of course, we turned China over to the communists. And what most people have forgotten is how the communists happened to take China. Well, in 1948, 47, and 49, there was a policy in our State Department to do everything they could to undercut General Chiang Kai-shek, who led the nationalist government, and bring communism to power. And if you go back and you read the McCarran Committee reports, which we have and which we make available to anybody who would like to have them, why the Senate committee found that General Chiang Kai-shek had been undercut by American policy, which put an arms embargo on General Chiang Kai-shek so he couldn't buy weapons anywhere in the world, and even the weapons he had already bought and purchased, which were on Okinawa and other Pacific islands, he couldn't get his hands on. And so it wasn't that he was ever defeated in battle. He didn't lose the Civil War. There wasn't any war. He just retreated about 3 weeks ahead of the Chinese communists who were advancing because they had nothing to fight with. Well, Congress was very upset about that. It looked like China was going to go communist, and here our boys had fought a war to allow the people of the world to determine the type of government they wanted. So Congress appropriated $125 million, which today would be probably $1 billion, $1.5 billion, for weapons for Chiang Kai-shek. But the State Department kept the ships laden with the weapons in port in San Francisco and Los Angeles for a year and a half. And when the ships finally arrived in China after the communists controlled the nation, they broke open the cases why the bolts didn't fit the rifles and they were therefore useless. We brought communism to China, you see, and it happened under Harry Truman's watch. And the question is, why did that happen? Well, before the evening is over, I hope you'll understand why that happened. Because there are people who have a different vision of the world than you and I. They believe in the Parliament of Man and the Federation of the World. The second poem I encountered when I was teaching and living in South Africa. That time my son was attending the University of Cape Town Medical School, and I went down to visit him, and I noticed up on the hillside at the base of Table Mountain, that great flat-top mountain that towers over Cape Town, a monument. I'd never seen it before, and so we decided to walk up and see what it was. It looked like a small replica of the Lincoln Memorial with the vertical pillars and a flat top, but of course this was not in marble, it was in gray granite. And We trudged up the long, dusty path and came to the base of the stairs leading up to the monument itself. And on either side are these great granite lions guarding the entranceway. And you get inside past the pillars, and there's nothing there but a great pedestal. And on top of the pedestal, the bust of a man about twice life size, with a stern look on his face and hollowed out eyes that follow you wherever you move, for you've dared to enter his sanctuary. But engraved in the granite on the pedestal beneath the bust are these words: "The intense and brooding spirit still shall quicken and control. Living, he was the land, and dead, his soul shall be her soul." And, of course, you have to understand that that was the eulogy that was read at Cecil John Rhodes' funeral in 1902. It was written by Rudyard Kipling, his close friend and associate. And what most people do not understand is that to quicken is to come back to life after death. And Cecil Rhodes still lives on. His shadow hangs long over Africa and Europe. And the movement that he began dominates the country in which you live today. Because Cecil Rhodes had a dream of the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World, of creating a secret society that would one day bring about a world government. And so he left his great fortune to two purposes. One was to the secret society, and the other was to something known as the Rhodes Scholarships. Now, it is not simply coincidence that our President Clinton, happens to be a Rhodes Scholar, that the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, General Wesley Clark, happens to be a Rhodes Scholar, that the Deputy Secretary of State, Strobe Talbot, is a Rhodes Scholar. In fact, Rhodes Scholars are at every level of our government. They're working within our major banks, our industries. They're the presidents, not teaching at our colleges, they're the presidents of our colleges, because the men who were taken from the United States and from Europe and from the various British colonies and sent to Oxford for our Rhodes Scholarships are there indoctrinated in these ideas of world government, indoctrinated in the idea that we really need an elite to rule the world, because you common people are incapable of governing yourselves. And after 3 years there, as their faith in God is undermined and replaced with this belief in this new spirituality, they return to America. And, of course, they go into key positions. And if you want to get ahead in the world, maybe you'd like to become the president, one of the best places to go is to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar.